All right, so welcome back to the Prolific Super Producer Podcast. We are on episode 21 of the Prolific Super Producer. Did I say it right? Prolific Super Producer Podcast.
You said it.
I've said it so wrong so many times that I just second guess when I say it right now. Okay, anyway, we are back, and what we're going to be talking about today is 5 steps to going pro with music. So this is kind of an encapsulation of both Nathan and I's journey into doing music professionally, and we want to just kind of break it down into 5 simple steps that you can follow, and no matter what step you're on, or if you're just starting, you can follow this episode to ultimately going pro with your music. So, before we dive into that, though, if you're struggling to get that industry standard quality for your mixes, then go ahead and check out my book, The Objective Mix. It teaches you the objective standards of how to get an industry standard quality mix. There's a link in the description if you are interested in that. Let's get back to the video. With that, let's dive into today's topic, which is 5 steps to going pro. And what is the first step to going pro, Nathan?
Yeah, okay, I'm so pumped to talk about this. So really the purpose of this topic, right, is like to just be aware of where you're at. So we kind of like tried to phase it out a little bit, 5 steps, kind of like 5 phases, 5 zones that you could potentially resonate with and find yourself in, just to kind of help you know, okay, how far you've come, which can be encouraging, but then also maybe the few steps that you have left to go if going pro is something that you want to do, right? So we're hoping that this can be a helpful identifier, because it can also be like, okay, I want to go pro, but like, how do I do that? And the how is often, you can find that out based on where you are. So we want to help you find where you're at and help you get to the next stage to going pro. So step 1 is what we kind of thought is, okay, where do you start? Well, you start with inspiration. Right? Where there was something that happened to where you no longer were just a consumer of music, but you wanted to be a creator of music, right? Like that happens for all of us. At some point, you're inspired by music, maybe you love listening to music, you have some favorite artists or something, and then at some point, it's not enough to just listen anymore. Something inside you says, hey, I could do that too. I could create a piece like this too. Like you move past that consumer and into a creator kind of mentality. So I just kind of think that's where everyone starts, is you kind of cross the fence, so to speak. You or hop the fence maybe, and you get over to this other territory of, okay, I want to do the thing that was inspiring me. It's not enough to just listen and be pumped up to this music, to my favorite music. I want to be able to do that for other people too. So thoughts there, Tyson, like in that just like first starting line?
Well, I'm curious, do you remember the moment that you decided that you wanted to do music? Do you remember what inspired you?
Yes, I do. Wow, I'm so glad I remember this. Yes, I do remember the exact moment. So it was on a road trip with my dad and with my whole family, but my dad and I were in the front seat, and a song came on the radio, and I've later found out that the song is Apologize by OneRepublic, which was, remixed by Timbaland, so it was that version. And I just remember the song coming on, playing on the radio, and I just was listening, and I heard this little, I heard this little, beatboxing voice, and I told my dad, I was like, Dad, is that someone's voice? Is that someone's voice going, whatever, 10-year-old beatboxing, And he was like, he was listening to, and he was like, yeah, I think that's someone's voice. And then the chorus hit, and I was just like in love with the chorus. And I remember I couldn't shake that. I could not shake that experience of hearing what was happening. And then something about my dad just affirming, yeah, that's another human making that sound. And I was like, could make that, could I do that kind of stuff too? I mean, we couldn't get home fast enough from our road trip. Like once we got back, I was just experimenting with sounds on my dad's keyboard and starting to come up with my own things. And that was a really good question, dude. I hadn't thought about that in a long time, but that was the exact moment where I remember crossing the line, like something happened. That's really cool.
That's super cool,
dude. Okay, back at you though. Do you remember? I mean, to put you on the spot, but
I don't actually remember. I think there's some key moments that I remember of listening to a band or a certain song that's like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. But it was more like it wasn't the initial spark. It was like those were the defining moments of I'm actually serious about this rather than just getting into it, right? Because I had always kind of sort of been into it, having like taken piano lessons from my mom when I was like 6, and
Okay.
learning like music was a part of like my family's culture, at least on my mom's side. My dad doesn't really have a musical bone in his body, but like, so it was kind of part of the kind of ingrained into me from childhood that like music is the thing and you can create it. And
That's
I didn't,
cool.
but I didn't really take it seriously. Actually, now I'm talking about it, I do remember
Let's go.
the moment that I decided that I really wanted to produce music or like take music more seriously. I don't know if that's the same question.
I guess when what was the start of where what had you cross the line where you're like, I want to do this thing that I'm hearing?
Yeah, no, I can't tell you.
Well, I feel like that's actually more realistic. Like, I feel like that's probably for most people, it's just kind of like, oh, you can't even remember because it's just, as long as you can remember, it's been a part of you. And like, it just slowly,
right.
You just all of a sudden are creating. Yeah, I think that that's actually more realistic. That's what most people is probably like, oh, I've just like at some point, like you said, maybe there's a few moments, but that's pretty,
Yeah.
that's pretty good.
Anyway,
If something hits you though, drop it at some point in the podcast, and you can just like put it in the beginning. But I feel like in this inspiration section, right? Like you're definitely playing copycat. I mean, and that's totally fine. That's expected of this stage, right? Like, you shouldn't feel bad about that, of just trying to emulate the artists that you admire, the sounds that you admire, the whatever. Like, you're just trying to write music that sounds like someone else. That sounds probably like the very artist or song or set of songs or sounds that got you to cross the line in the first place. And that's totally okay, right? And I feel like at this point too, right? Does the gear, what is that called? Gear acquisition syndrome. Doesn't
I don't think it's like quite hit. It's not quite hit its head yet. It might. For some people who are like prone to gear acquisition syndrome, then yes, I think it could rear its head right here and really bite you. But dude, I think most of the time people are just like, I just like want something to that I can like use to create music. Like, I don't care how good it is. I don't care what it is.
True.
I just want the thing that will allow me to, that won't stop me from making music, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And so most people, like, obviously, everyone has like a Focusrite 2i2, like that's the thing to have. And say one microphone, like a condenser like this one, or 58 something,
old reliable, yes,
whatever. Yeah, I don't know if we talked about gear on this podcast, but
I don't know if we have yet.
Anyway, we might have a little bit, but anyway, so you get just like the super basic stuff, but I don't think it's really generally advanced, right? Because you don't want to get advanced stuff at this stage. And I would encourage people to not get advanced stuff at this stage, because it's going to get in the way of you creating music. Once you learn the tools you have, the simple ones, then you can kind of expand into the more, higher tier, more expensive stuff if you feel like you need to. Totally. But, we're both of us, Nathan to a further extent than I, are minimalists when it comes to our setup with music, because like we don't want anything to get in the way of us just creating in the fastest way possible. So like if I had a whole console here and I had to like boot it up, let it warm up before I wanted to record a guitar track that's going to be in for 4 bars in my song, like it's like it's not worth the effort, right? Because it takes me half an hour to turn on my console, let it warm up, to be able to record a 12-second track. And so like that's the type of thing that's just like, it's not necessary to really just be a super producer or get stuff down on paper or into the
or into
computer.
Onto
the hard drive. There we go.
There we go. Onto the hard drive.
So it's I would encourage anybody who's in this stage to not get too enthralled with gear, because yes, it's marketed because it makes a lot of money, but it actually has very little to do with you and your ability to create professional sounding stuff. So Nathan, what interface are you using right now in your music production?
Okay, well, this is this is an interesting topic because you and I were just talking about this offline a little bit ago. But like I recently just downgraded all of my fancy gear that I had and replacing it with just good enough gear. So I am rocking not even a Focusrite 2i2. I just have a Focusrite Solo. I have a Focusrite Solo. Got it brand new, unopened, like on Mercari, so like an eBay kind of site that someone just never opened it. Got it for $60. $60.
Okay, so listen, everybody. So a producer who has had a song get on Grey's Anatomy, one of the largest TV shows in the world, is using a Focusrite Solo. That means if you have a Focusrite 2i2, you have twice as good of gear as Nathan.
You literally are beating me right now. Yes.
But the point, right?
It's only a recent thing. I got to say that out loud. Like, I've not always been like this. I have my, proclivities towards fancy gear. It usually rears its head more towards plugins and stuff. But I absolutely I've had the fancy gear. I've had the fancy microphones. I've done, that whole thing. And it's more of at this point in my journey, like Tyson said, I really care about how quickly can I create, how like the less resistance, the better, less friction, the better. Plug and play is kind of my jam right now, just so that I can get to creating, because I value that process, the ability to get to that process more than the fancier gear that I had. And not that fancy gear is bad. I loved it. I mean, it served its purpose. It's just, for me personally, where I'm at, yeah, I sold some stuff and I'm just getting super affordable gear. So take heart out there. Don't think that you need all this fancy stuff. Like, use what you have. Use what you can afford. And it's more than enough. I promise you. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess like the kind of try to closing this rabbit hole here that we've opened.
We sure opened it, didn't we?
don't let the gear hold you back, and just get what you need to be able to create right now. That's the ultimate goal. Like I don't want anyone to go into debt buying gear because you're going to just color the way that you view music, and all of this gear really isn't going to make that big of a difference anyway. So keep that in mind. And then the last kind of point on this very first step that we've spent a lot of time on is, right, we're still on the inspiration stage, so step one. The last one is you're still learning your craft. So not only are you getting the stuff that you need to create music, you also are still learning how to create music. So you're still probably learning how to sing properly, how to support your voice, how to have good tone. You're probably still learning, whatever other instruments that you want to learn. So guitar, piano, drums, whatever is in your wheelhouse that you have, dedicated yourself to learning. Those are still being developed. Mixing, mastering, recording, all of that stuff is also included in this stage as well. You're still learning just the very fundamental basics of your craft as a producer. So
100%.
Moving on to step 2, we've now been inspired, and we've kind of got the basic stuff that we need to then create music. Step 2 is where we start developing those skills that we started learning in step 1. So we learn what the process is, because most of the time we just want to create music. And, when I first started creating music or started recording, I was like, all right, I know how to play the songs now. Me and my band are going to record the songs, and then it's going to sound amazing. It's going to sound like my favorite record.
Just right away. Yeah.
Just right away. Right when the audio goes from that microphone into the DAW, it's going to sound pro.
Yes.
If you can probably guess, I was severely disappointed when that did not happen.
Yeah, me too.
And I didn't realize there was more steps to the process than just recording the instruments. And so, I spent a lot of time. I remember very distinctly, I had a Windows 2001, it was Windows XP, as the operating system. And I was using a cracked version of Cubase with a borrowed interface, trying to mix. Oh, and I was mixing on the Bose Quiet Comfort headphones.
Dude, that's quite an image right there. It's great. I love it.
And that was my first experience mixing. So that's where I came from. But the whole point is I was inspired to create something, and I did that. I then got enough gear, right? Yeah. Good enough gear to then record my album with my band. And then I was like learning what the process was. I was trying to figure out, okay, like what is an EQ? How do I use one?
Yes.
What is a compressor? I still didn't even figure out what a compressor was by the end of the first album, but we'll leave that for another day.
Yeah. For real.
Anyway, but obviously, like I was not good. I was learning the very, very fundamentals of how to use a DAW and how to apply a reverb plugin to a track. Like that's where my skill was currently at. But I was developing that because I ended up mixing the whole album. Not very well, but I did it. And that was my first step into really developing skills beyond just the basics of plugging in the interface to the computer.
Love that. I feel like that's such a process. I don't know. Like I didn't even know that there was a term bedroom producer. Like it's funny. I don't know if you relate to this. Like I didn't even know that there was a term for, or like in the industry, it's called like 100%er, like someone who can do all the parts of the process. Like I didn't even know that was a thing. So for me, it was like, I want to make the kind of songs that I was hearing, right? Because I crossed the fence. So to me, it was just like, okay, I need to write the song. So I would like, melody and come up with some sort of lyrics, and then it's like, okay, but in the song that I'm hearing, they had like other instruments. How do I get other instruments in there that I don't even know how to play? And it's like, oh, virtual instruments, right? And it's like, and then it's like, okay, but it doesn't quite sound the way that, oh, there's this thing called mixing. Oh, okay, so now I just need to mix it. And then it's like, I wasn't even thinking about these parts of the process as separate things initially. It was just reaching for doing whatever I needed to do to just make the song. I wasn't even thinking about separate parts of the process. I thought that everybody did this. So like if I was listening to, called One Republic or whatever, like I would be like, oh, they did everything. Like they mixed it, they recorded it, they engineered it. So I thought every artist ever always wrote their own song, always was recording it themselves, was always mixing it themselves. I was so ignorant in that sense, and to come to find out, no, these are actually separate parts that people do separately. So I don't know. It's like, did you experience that at all? It was kind of like, it sounded like in that what you were saying is just, oh, I'm just doing what I need to do to get the thing to sound good, and you're not
100%.
Yeah.
I guess I knew that there was the concept of like the recording engineer, right? Because when I was introduced to production recording, like there was a guy that I met from our small town who was a retired touring bassist. He was the best bassist I have ever, so like still to this day I've ever met. But he had like a bunch of gear, right? And so he was like wanting to help us out and record our album. And he recorded the very first one, which still sounded by far the best out of anything, even unmixed.
Oh man!
And after so he kind of like showed us like the basics of like what we were doing, and so I kind of understood. I'm like, okay, like there's some like people that do this, because he had like mentioned something like, oh, like in a real studio, XYZ person would be doing this process or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
And so like I had some idea. But yeah, going into it, like I knew that there was like such thing as mixing.
Yeah.
But I didn't know how to do it. And I had no clue that mastering wasn't even a thing.
Oh, yeah. Same.
So there's like, things like that. It's just like, and if you're not like in the culture, I feel like it's really hard to pick up that knowledge, right? Just on your own, because you're just experimenting. You just don't know any better. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so, which is, I don't know. Maybe it's a good thing that you don't know this stuff, because
honestly,
then it keeps you like kind of in the dark and like delusional that you could still create something super pro your very first time.
Yeah, seriously.
So I think there is like some level of delusion that you need, honestly, as an artist, to create something and like still think it's amazing, but like recognizing you need to improve, but also think it's still amazing when it's really not. I think that's a huge part of this process.
I love that you said that. That is a massive thing that is underrated. Yeah, a healthy amount of delusion, I think, is required here, and it rears its head in these first few phases. I feel like it's only later on in some of the phases or steps we'll get to where like I don't know, that's the spell kind of gets broken for a second, and because your what is it, your knowledge level finally caught up to you, and like you finally can see things for what they are, and you are more aware of what you don't know. So it kind of breaks that spell of delusion a little bit, where you can start to really second guess what you're creating, because now you know what it could sound like and all that kind of stuff. But there's something to be said for that, like, basement bedroom mentality, just the come up mentality of where you don't know what you don't know and you're totally cool with it. All you know is you love this thing and you're just trying different stuff. Like, that kind of delusion, I think, is necessary to propel you to the further steps that we're going to talk about. I love that you brought that up. It's so good.
Yeah.
So good.
So I guess the next question is, though, how long do people like kind of generally stay in this stage? Because inspired like feels pretty quick, because I hear something that I really love. I then, buy enough gear or just somehow acquire enough gear to then record myself or my band, whatever. Yeah. And now I am starting to develop and learn the craft of recording, production, all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. How long do I have to stay in this second stage developing skills before I'm actually proficient to produce pro level stuff? How long did it take you, Nathan?
So, full transparency, this was like a 5 to 10 year process. Please don't click out of the podcast yet. That is not the marketing thing to do. Well, if you just hang around, we'll tell you we can get there in like 2. No, to be completely honest, this is a 5 to 10 year thing. And I say that to just be honest, Now, that doesn't mean that nothing good happens until the 5 to 10 year mark. Like, things can happen. You know what I mean? And I think like some people can have a natural ability and it can accelerate things. Some people, it might be a little bit slower. But this process, you have to understand, is just like anything else. It takes practice, and you're just not going to be good when you start. You're right. Maybe you have some natural skills and they're going to show up here and there, which is totally cool. But this is a process where you're just going to make a lot of bad songs. And if you look up any accomplished, acclaimed songwriter, artist, and they're in an interview and they're actually being sincere about this thing, they're going to tell you, yeah, you're going to write a lot of bad songs. And then out of that big group of bad songs, a few are going to pop up and be like, oh, okay, that was cool. And it's good that happens, because it's just enough to keep you going. You're like, oh, that was really good. Or you finally get a head nod from your spouse, or from one of your family members. Then they're like, oh, wow, like this is, and it keeps you going. So you go through this process of making a lot of bad songs, a few good ones come up, or a few okay ones really come up, and then you're making a lot of okay songs, and then a few good ones come up, and then you're making a lot of good songs, and a few great ones come up. And if you continue this process and you're diligent and consistent with it, this is how people get into hit territory, right? We've talked about this on this podcast a lot, like your batting average as a song creator, like it can absolutely go up, where it doesn't have to take you as long or as many attempts to create something that sounds good. But in the beginning, it's slow. It just is. It's just a slow thing. And I feel like this process too, a lot of people are getting into this at, I could be wrong. I know there's a lot of people that get into music later in life. But this is usually a kind of thing, if you're getting into music while you're in school, you know what I mean? You don't just have all day to be able to create, to be able to do stuff. Like, you have other obligations, school, holding down a job. Maybe you're getting into music when you're married and have a house full of children, right? So like when I say 5 to 10 years, I don't know what you think about this, Tyson. I think it would be much, much lower if we weren't accounting for the whole real life stuff. Like, if all you could do is sit in a vacuum and just create songs and get the feedback you needed to, and you could just do that over and over again, I don't think it would take 5 to 10 years. I think it'd be a lot quicker. So I say 5 to 10 years because I care about you and you listening, and I care about you in your life, because I assume you have one, And so, like, it's just a process that you have to stick with, because you can't do music all day, every day yet, right? Maybe you have dreams to get there, but the reality is you're doing other stuff with your life, so you don't have as much time. You just have the time that you have to practice with it. So I think that is a big thing in the equation of when I say, hey, it took me 5 to 10 years, just because life is there too, and you just can't work on songs all day, every day. Maybe you can get to that point, but it's definitely not like that when you're starting, So I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Tyson. What would you say about you? Like, about how long in this stage?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that my journey was very similar, because I felt like, and it might have actually been longer than 10 years, honestly, between the time that I technically started, but I also felt there was some stuff that got in the way of me being able to like develop my skills, because I didn't have access to a DAW. After that very first project, I had to give my interface back to
right,
like
yeah.
the guy that I borrowed it from. So I didn't have an interface. I kind of forgot how to use Cubase, and I didn't have anything until until after I graduated high school, and then I bought, and like my whole goal like was to earn enough money one summer to buy a MacBook. Like that was my goal. And so then I bought my MacBook, came pre-installed with Pro Tools. Not Pro Tools, excuse me, Logic. I don't know why I just said that. That's embarrassing.
I was like, wow.
No,
I didn't know they did that.
No, with Logic. Anyway, and I then started to dive into this. Like that's when I created my very first solo project. That's like when I became the super producer, right?
Okay, yeah.
And in the more traditional sense of like doing everything. Like I didn't have a band at that point. I was just making music in my bedroom.
Yeah.
And so if you really like count that as the start, which I probably would consider, it took me, I'm 29 right now. So probably around six years or so.
Yeah.
I think that was probably what it took. So this is the deal. I think that it took us that long because we didn't have specific training to be able to do what we wanted to do.
Ooh,
There's
yeah,
a couple things. So first of all, there's a lot of skills involved in being a super producer. So if your goal is to be a true super producer, it's probably going to take you that long. Because there's probably going to be parts of the process that you're not naturally inclined to do well.
Yes.
And with that in mind, it's going to take you an inordinate amount of effort to be able to learn those specific skills comparatively to anything else in the music production process. For example, I think that mixing didn't really come very naturally to me. Mastering did come naturally to me. And recording came very naturally to me. Playing instruments, honestly, I'm not a very good musician. Singing, I learned to sing when I was 18, so it took me a while to like kind of get up to speed on like my vocals. So things like that, like, I just wasn't naturally inclined to do those things well, and so it took me longer to develop those skills to be able to produce at a pro level. And then the other side of it is if you have somebody there who's teaching you. So, okay, actually back up. When I decided I wanted to take music seriously and make it into a true living for myself and my family, I started investing very heavily in online courses. And that was the difference for me from going to like from this like amateur, like I sort of kind of knew what I was doing. I knew how to use the DAW. I knew how to use the tools for the most part, but I wasn't very good at using the tools. And these courses that I took were the breakthrough for me of like learning like, oh, that's how you're supposed to use this tool, or like that's what the tool is really truly doing.
Yeah.
Like what is a compressor actually doing to your audio? Like I had no clue. I just knew that if I tweaked these knobs here, it kind of sounded better. Right. And so, or like, I threw it on and it sounded louder, so I liked it. There's like just basic things that you just think how to use until you learn how to use it, and then you're like, oh well, I didn't know anything back there.
Yes.
But all that said, when I started like investing in this education, I increased from like a level 2 to like a level 7 almost immediately because I learned the right things to do. Even though I hadn't like perfected those skills, it was still, okay, I know what to do now and what the basics are. So I think that you could cut this down from that 5 to 10 year range way down, especially if you're focusing on single skills. If you just focus on mixing for the next 3 months, you could probably improve dramatically over the next 3 months in your mixing. And then, you're not going to like lose that skill necessarily. You might get a little rusty, but it's not going to go away.
Yes.
And so I don't know. If I was to go back in time and want to develop all the skills that I have today, I think what I would have done is focused on very specific skills at each stage of the process. So I probably would have like focused on just learning how to sing for the first 6 months.
Yeah.
And then I would have learned how to, do probably record for the next 6 months. And then I would have learned how to mix for the next 6 months. And then I would have learned how to master for the next 6 months.
Yeah.
And by the end of that, I would then have all the skill set that I need to be a super producer in about 2 years rather than 5 to 10. So And obviously, most of you listening probably already have some basis of, skill in some of these areas. You just need to improve certain ones of them. So maybe just focus on that for the next 6 months. And there's also a bias towards doing what we're already good at rather than leaning into what we're not good at. We want to play to our strengths rather than improve our weaknesses. And while that can be a good play in certain regards, if you're trying to be a super producer, it's inherently holding you back. Anyway,
that's right. Comes with the territory. No, I think that's really a really good point too. Is like, and it's just okay. Like I still am going to advocate that I think it's good, even if you just want to be an artist or something and you don't want to handle mixing, handle mastering, all that kind of stuff. You just want to write and record your stuff. Cool. But like, I still think it's worth understanding these parts of the process. We've talked about this on the podcast too. Like, just be dangerous enough. Doesn't mean you have to be incredible. Doesn't mean you have to be just spectacular at mixing or something. But just be good enough to where you can speak the language of the mixing engineer. You can speak the language of the mastering engineer, and you can at least understand what you're handing off. You know what I mean? Like, we've talked about that in outsourcing before. So I think also like that's a really good point about just getting education and getting mentorship. Like, I know you and I both have had several mentors in our lives at various stages throughout our music career, and like, nothing will accelerate you as much as getting in the room with someone who knows a lot more than you. You know what I mean? And just like having them be right there and get that quick, immediate feedback that's even more hands-on than a course. That can do a lot of accelerating. I'm thinking back through some key people that I've been able to link up with like that, and just, the amount of growth that I had in such a short period of time was very real because of that too. So don't be daunted. Don't be daunted by 5 to 10 years. That's kind of like, hey, I'm just being real. This is what it took, but that doesn't mean that it has to be that way. Like, you could be smart, and listen to a podcast like this. Where was this when we were coming up, right? Like, where were these YouTube channels teaching people how to do this stuff? None of this stuff was out there, But there's so much information out there that if you can latch on to some good information, some good mentors, I absolutely think that, like, this could be accelerated, which is super exciting. Like, I wish that could have happened,
Yeah, 100%. I think another little tidbit, little gold nugget, if you will, that I wanted to give everybody.
I haven't heard that in forever. A tidbit. I love
it. So if you want to get in the room with people who have the skills that you want to learn, it's not as difficult as a lot of people think. So a lot of more traditionalists will tell you to go get an internship at a studio if you want to learn how to produce. I don't think that is a bad way to learn production, because you're going to be learning from somebody who's a professional in the industry doing it at a pro level. Inherently, they're getting paid to do it, right?
Yeah,
that's the definition of professional.
Yes.
So that's a great place to start. So what I would do if I were just starting to come up and just starting to get into this field and wanting to learn from somebody really good, what I would do is I would visit all the studios, or a reasonable amount of studios, so pick 10 or 12 studios in your city that are near you that you would like to intern at, and then talk to all of them. Most of them are more than willing to give you a studio tour because they think that you're going to book studio time. Don't lead them on, but just ask for a studio tour. Most people are more than willing to do that for you, and then like see who's cool, see who you kind of vibe with, and then find out what they need. More than likely, they're going to love an intern who goes in, takes photos of their artists recording and of them mixing and whatever else around the studio, and posts on their social media. I can almost guarantee that anyone would love an intern who did that for them. Sure. So find a way that you can add value. I think that's probably the lowest hanging fruit. Coming from, like, I am in a partnership with some other producers. We have a studio in town. Like, we would love that.
Yeah, straight up.
So if you're in Boise, Idaho, then give us a call.
Yeah. No. There you go.
But in reality, though, I think that is a great way to kind of get your foot in the door, do those kind of low-hanging fruit tasks that are, very low skill, but also don't take that much effort necessarily, but also save time of the people who are actually trying to do the production thing. If you prove yourself to be valuable in that area, then you will get your foot in the door more and more and more, and you will likely be able to learn those skills that you really want to. But just to get your foot in the door is incredibly difficult nowadays, unless you're willing to do something of value for them that may not be actually what you ultimately want to learn how to do.
That's really good.
Anything to add there, Nathan?
No, I think that was a great little ninja hack for people too. And I think that, so if like this phase that we were in, right, of like developments, you've gone from inspiration to developing, honing your skills. At some point, you will, kind of reach step 3. And like step 3, I think we're just calling like specialization, right? So, and this is kind of what we've already kind of hinted at this, but like, this is something where we have like a part of the process that we naturally gravitate towards, especially if you're doing the whole super producer route. You ideally are experimenting with all these different hats that you get to wear. And then undoubtedly, if you've done enough tracks, there's probably parts of the process that usually go faster for you. Maybe they feel a little more fun for you. You always enjoy that part of the process. It's so much so that maybe you'll kind of skimp out on some of the other parts just to do that one or something. And that's totally cool. But this is kind of that specialization phase that Tyson and I were kind of hinting at. And this is key. And because the reality is, I think any super producer ever is probably going to have a hat or two that they wear best. Not that they can't wear all of them, but there's going to be parts that they wear best. And if you're wanting to go pro, it's very important to understand which parts of the process that is, because it's an ultimate hack to start getting paid quicker. Like trying to wait to be paid as a super producer versus getting paid as a top liner or a mixing engineer or a mastering engineer. That's going to happen much faster. You know what I'm saying? So like if you want to go pro quicker, aka just getting paid for getting paid for what you're doing to do music, right? If you kind of hone in on your specialization, what part of the process comes easiest to you, and then kind of use that to monetize your music, you can do that so much faster because you're picking one part of the process, right? People who can do all parts of the process, there's people who can do all parts of the process, there's definitely jobs out there, but they're probably not going to come as quickly because it's going to take longer to develop that skill set to even be at a professional enough level to get hired for all of the skills you can do. I would encourage you, if you just want to start getting paid for this music thing, and there's nothing like it once it starts happening, is to hone in on your specialization. What comes naturally to you? What do you enjoy the most? And start kind of offering that as a service. And I know that Tyson, you and I can both speak to this, but I think you even more about specializing, honing in on something, and then using that as kind of a gateway to getting some income. And you're now all of a sudden you are making money. You're literally making money doing this music thing. It becomes very real, very quick. I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm just going to share a little bit about my journey of, very, very briefly here, of kind of my journey from corporate America. I have a degree in accounting, so I was doing accounting and product management stuff at software firms. I'm not going to bore you with the details. I'll give you a hint. It involved healthcare and billing and software.
So, I mean,
most boring things in the world. All right, all combined into one. So, it's no surprise that I left.
Fair enough.
Anyway, but on the side, during when I was in my corporate job, I was trying to do the whole production thing. So I had one EP that I ever actually produced for somebody else for payment, and that was from start to finish. I did everything, and it was okay. It was fine. But I kind of found my sweet spot more in the mixing and mastering side, because that was a more specialized skill that people had a harder time with as artists. Most artists figured out how to record themselves, but they didn't know how to kind of mix and master themselves. So then I, started working with some guys that I, kind of knew, like friends of friends, people like that, mixing and mastering their stuff. And that worked out pretty well as kind of my little side hustle. And then I had set a date on the calendar essentially with my wife of okay, this is when we're going to allow Tyson to quit his job and go into music full time. And so I was trying to ramp up my whole side hustle income in the meantime to try to, prepare for that leap. But ultimately I quit. Then I did, the whole music thing for I think 2 or 3 months before we left to go to Germany. And we were in Germany for 4 months.
Wow.
Or almost 4 months. And we were just traveling around Europe kind of doing that thing. So my wife had just graduated school. And then when we came back, so this was basically 5 months, 6 months after I quit my corporate job, we got back to the US, and that's when I decided to specialize in mastering. And then I transitioned into this kind of more just mastering role. And then I was able to kind of build up some more business just doing mastering. I traveled around to meet other producers to try to get, business from them as their mastering engineer. For people who either didn't have a mastering engineer or didn't like their mastering engineer. And from there, I then got in touch with some other guys in my city who were trying to do this like artist management thing. And I'd always been really interested in that specific field because, mastering is cool and I like mastering, but it's not as meaningful as changing somebody's life, giving them a career in music, right? It's just, there's more life change with the career in music rather than I can make your song sound like a little bit better. So that interests me. So I kind of partnered with these guys, I did partner with these other individuals, and then we formed what is now today Night Owl Music Group. And so with all of our skills combined, essentially like creating the ultimate super producer, if you will, because we each have our own little specialties even within that area. Like we can all do all parts of the process, but we still have our own specialties. So there's another guy who does mixing, I do mastering, I also do marketing, for the company. So there's a lot of like, but I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that I went from kind of doing everything, the super producer thing, to find out what my specialty was. I then figured out mastering is really kind of my thing. I then specialized in mastering enough to then build up some sort of business. And then from there, I went back essentially a stage to now working with other people, collaborating to create this full stack service for artists. And so today we just launched, or I guess as of this episode, but we just launched our service of we'll produce your single and we'll guarantee 100,000 streams on your very first single working with us. Otherwise, you don't pay a dime. So like cool. That's the level, though, that you can get to by specializing and then basically finding other people who also specialize in certain areas.
Yes.
And creating this like super team of Avengers, right? That literally, we kind of talked about. It's kind of like that outsourcing mentality, but even just like kind of all internally to our partnership. So that was my journey into doing professional music. And like the value that specialization played in that, because it allowed me to quit my job, still be in music, and still find those other opportunities and be in a position to network enough to then find those other connections that ultimately, changed the course of my life entirely, because I'm doing this completely different thing than I used to be doing, which was just mastering. Yeah. So anyway.
So cool.
Anything to add there? Anything?
Oh no, I just think that's just a great illustration of. I just think that people, the number of times, that, and maybe, hey, you're listening to this like, well, I guess at least when we're filming this, we're coming off the holidays. Whenever this is coming out, it's probably not the holidays, but just fresh on the top of my mind is how very little most people know about how to make money with music. Just being with family and stuff, and it's like no slights to them or anything. It's just people really think that in order for you to make that, you must be broke, that you must be broke if you're doing this music thing, unless you're Beyonce. Like there's really, I'm just seeing it. There's a really black and white mentality of 0 to 100 kind of thing, where if you're not Beyonce, if you're not Taylor Swift, if you're not Jay-Z, you're not making money doing music. And it's like, wow, okay, there's actually such a category for like everybody along the way, from actually broke musician, stereotype or whatever, to a Drake or a Jay-Z. There's all these stops. There's all these little bus stops along the way of people out there literally just making a great living doing a part of the process, doing a part of the song creation process. So I just want to say that out loud, like it's very real to make money off of this music thing, and it might be more approachable than you think, and it might come in a form that you didn't envision it at first, because I think a lot of us envision the whatever, the rock star touring life, whatever, that's how you do it. Like there's just so many other ways to make money, make a living doing music, and if you have a certain part of the process that comes easy for you, you might want to consider putting that out there and see, if you could be of service to other people because of this thing that, you're so naturally, that comes naturally to you. And you could just start having income, and all of a sudden, like you can feel that professional switch of you're being paid to do music. So I just think that's a really good stopping point there, to just take notice of what you could specialize in, because that could help bring income in closer, and get you closer to going pro. But after this, right, like step 4 would be finding your own voice. This is kind of what we've talked about, right? And this is really the inverse of how you start, right? When you start, you're inspired, and it's kind of like this, outside in sort of funnel that's happening, where you're listening to something, it inspires you, so then you go take action. You hear something, it inspires you, so you go make something like it. And you kind of have that process ping-ponging back and forth, which is really good because it gets you a lot of reps in. But part of becoming a professional is you start to rely less on external stimulus, external, references, and you start to rely more on yourself, because at this point in the process, you've gone through the development, you've gone through specializing, like you've got some skills to pay the bills, but maybe quite literally, you know what I mean? And so like you're confident in your capabilities. And so you can sit down and not feel the overwhelm that a beginner would feel to try to create something from scratch, right? Like you could do this. So I think something that's really cool here is you need to start leaning into, it's instead of outside in, right? It's really inside out. So you start to find your own voice. And I think we've covered this in detail. Is it still episode 13, Tyson, or would it be a different one?
You should go back to episode 13. It might be... Yes, episode 13 is the episode where we talk about finding your own voice, the process to find your own voice. So go back and go to episode 13 to learn a much deeper dive on how to find your own voice and what that process really looked like for both Nathan and I. And then one other thing that I wanted to add in here is that one of the key distinction between this step and the prior step. So specialization is right where you're like really diving deep on your one, skill where you're kind of the genius, right? Of your superpower. Versus this step is like we're really diving into creating more than we're consuming. So we're not really taking, as Nathan already said, it's not outside in, it's inside out. And I think one of the keys, and both Nathan and I experienced this, like when we ultimately found our voices as like us as artists, uniquely, we stopped taking in so much music. We actually stopped listening to as much music as we were creating. And I think that is a healthy moment in every creator's life, is whether you're creating films or you're creating music or you're creating something else entirely, you're painting or whatever, right? Stop consuming so much and start creating more than you're consuming. It doesn't mean you have to completely stop consuming, but just don't consume as much and create more. So I think that's a great just rule for all creators. Once you've specialized and built those skills that you need, then start creating way more than you consume, and you're going to ultimately be forced to kind of listen to your own voice rather than voices outside of yourself, because that's all you have to create. This process of finding your own voice is basically combining everything from your entire past self that has experienced up until this point in time to then write and create something new. And it's a conglomeration of all of those influences all in, a single song or a single piece of creation, if you will, that you come up with. So I think that this is an interesting step of the process, and I think that some artists kind of overlook this and never actually dive deep into it.
Totally.
And I think that is a huge mistake, because they ultimately don't they don't get the benefit of actually finding their own voice, because they're consuming so much, because they're so influenced by other people. They never truly look inside of themselves and pull that out of whatever's inside. I don't know if that makes sense to you, Nathan, but
no, I think it does. And I think that and it perfectly leads into the kind of final step that we have here. But I would say definitely check out episode 13, because we do a super deep dive into all this, because it's a very real thing. And I think you're right. A lot of artists Because it's easier. I think that's part of it. Is it's easier to just listen to what's out there and what's working, and just try to kind of do a little bit of your flip of it or whatever, you know. And not that there's not a place for that. It's just if you are forever quenching what you like, your own voice and your own way and your own gut reactions and like inclinations, you could get to a point where, I don't know, you could do so much damage. It's really hard to get back to who you are and like this kind of sounds you make, because that's the tricky thing, right? Like all the artists that we love, we love them because of their sound, the way that they write, the way that we feel when we listen to them. And hopefully at their best, our favorite artists, you know, we feel that because it's so real. It's easy to tell they're being themselves. They're being authentic, you know? So you've kind of got to do the same thing. In order to be able to find your own voice, you have to lean on what is in here. As woo-woo as that might sound, I think there's a lot of validity there. Like you kind of have to do the soul searching and have to turn off all the external noise and just see what's in there, you know? So I think that's a powerful part of the step of turning pro. And I think that step 5 here we have is to be able to go pro. Well, you like write great songs. And when you hit to this phase, this final step, right, you've gone through all these other things. At this level, your batting average has gone up, like we've talked about, right? Where it's much easier. It's so much easier for you to sit down and create a song that you at least know is going to be good. It's going to be decent. It's going to be all right. You know what I mean? You're not really concerned with making, really, really bad songs. Maybe every once in a while it happens, like you start something and you're like, ooh, but here's the thing, because of your skill level and your knowledge, you don't get too far into that song. Like you call it, you know what I mean? Like you're like, nope, all right, this is not going to go anywhere good. Let's start something else. So at this step, you kind of have a lot of confidence. And I think confidence is huge at this step, and it's often overlooked. Confidence is everything. It really is. And especially as a creative, when in any kind of artist, right? Like Tyson was saying, filmmaking, art, photography, like it's a vulnerable process that we're going through. It's no different than music, right? So to have confidence here it contributes to your ability to be able to write a lot of great songs and make a lot of good songs, because you've gone through this whole process. You've been probably affirmed here somewhere in the developing stage or somewhere in the specialization or find your own voice. Like you've been affirmed by outside third parties that can say, hey, you do have a knack for this. This does sound good. And you've made so many songs and you've done so many projects that you can kind of have a healthy amount of confidence, not cockiness, but like a healthy amount of confidence that like, hey, yeah, no, like I can do this music thing. I can mix a song. Yeah, I can top line. I can whatever, you know, because you have the proofs in the pudding, you know? And I think part of that, to go pros have a pro mentality. Like and you have to choose that. You have to choose this mentality to be confident and to be able to say, like, I can make good songs and I can do this music stuff, and I'm going to like figure it out. Even if I don't know what this is, I'm going to be able to figure it out, you know? Like there's something that pros have of like just of this mentality of choosing to be confident, choosing to be a professional. And I think that like there's some cool stories about this whole mentality thing. I don't know if Tyson, you had like, there's one super cool one I'd love for you to share, like the mile one. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess one other disclaimer I want to add before I tell you the cool story is that don't try to jump to this stage too early. Because if you are in, say, stage 2 and you're like starting to develop your skills and you're like, oh, like, you know, I've been doing this thing for a month or 2 and I'm like, I feel really even if you're doing it for 9 months and you feel like you've made a lot of progress, you probably have, but you may not be in this stage yet. So I would just warn you of trying to jump to this stage too early, because ultimately confidence without experience, confidence without proof is just delusion, right? You're just being conceited in your own skills that don't actually, you know, measure up against everybody else's skill.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind. Don't try to rush this process, because if you rush to this, then you're going to come across as conceited, and then nobody's really going to respect what you do and what you put out. So just a quick warning there, disclaimer. But with that, this is a really cool just analogy when it comes to confidence and the power of confidence, though, in your music. Because once you have developed those skills, you've developed your own voice, you have the ability to create some really cool music and really cool stuff, whether that's in your specialty or even expanded from your specialty, right? And so there was a moment in history where nobody thought that humans could run a 4-minute mile. They didn't think it was physically possible to run faster than 4 minutes. And there was a bunch of people, right, at the same stage who were trying to break the 4-minute mile. And ultimately, there was one guy who was crazy enough to believe that it was possible to break the 4-minute mile. His name was Roger Bannister, and he was the funkiest runner in the world. If you ever look at his running form, he ran with his like head way back and like his feet way in front of him. I ran cross country when I was in high school, so like I know a little bit about running form, and his was not very good. But he decided that he was going to break this 4-minute mile, and ultimately he did. He actually broke it, and then within 3 months of him breaking the 4-minute mile, there was 3 other people who also broke a 4-minute mile. And the point that this record of 4 minutes and 50 milliseconds or something, why that record had stood for so long is that nobody believed it was possible to break a 4-minute mile, even though ultimately it's kind of arbitrary. But after Roger Bannister had broken the 4-minute mile, there's a bunch of other people that broke it at the same exact time, because then they believed that it was possible for somebody to break the 4-minute mile, and then they did. So all of that, coming back to music, is if you believe it's possible that you could write a song that gets 1 million streams, opens the door of possibility that you will actually write a song that gets 1 million streams. If you don't inherently believe that that is possible, you won't do it, because you're not going to put forth the extra little effort into your music to make it that good. Even though you possess the skill, doesn't mean you're guaranteed to produce at that potential, right? If your skill level is a level 8, doesn't mean you're going to write a level 8 song. You might write a level 6 song because it's still within your skill level, but you need to push yourself beyond that little tiny extra to be able to then produce at your level, which is the level 8. And then you'll actually receive those results. Obviously, the more you push yourself, the better that gets. There's no limit on how good you can get. That's what I love about music in every aspect, right? There's no such thing as a perfect mix. There's no such thing as a perfect song. It can always be improved. And the better you get, the more areas you see that you can improve, which is why this journey is so fun and so exciting at every single stage of the process, because there's ultimately no end, and the journey is always worth it. So I don't know if that got a little too meta, but Nathan, I think let's dive into the Dunning-Kruger effect, because I think that this is another super powerful concept for people to be aware of at this point in time.
Oh yeah, totally. This is probably a good wrap up here. So the Dunning-Kruger effect, I believe we've covered a little bit before, but it's just this. It's a cognitive bias. And this is kind of like goes in line with what Tyson was saying. Hey, don't jump to step 5 too soon. There's this weird thing that happens, and it's about capability. It's about competence. So like this Dunning-Kruger effect states that people who think that they are competent in something, like people who think that, oh, I'm really good at this. I'm really good at mixing, for example. If you're saying that, you probably aren't as competent as you think. And then on the flip side, if you're saying, oh man, I could still get better at mixing. I'm not quite there yet. That person is actually probably pretty competent. It's this weird inverse kind of like mentality and kind of belief that we have, that the study found, that people who think that, they just think that they're crushing it. Oh man, I'm so good at this. You're probably not, And then the people who are like, man, I don't know. I'm just not there yet. Like the people who have that awareness, they know that they're not quite there yet because they have the knowledge to know that they're not quite there yet. They know where they are, and they can compare to where other things are. But that person is actually more competent. So it's just a weird thing that you kind of got to watch out for. Just be careful. Would caution you. Have confidence. Be confident and be delusional from the beginning. Cool, like a healthy amount. But if you ever find yourself saying, "Man, I'm just so good at whatever," or like, just be careful, because like you might not be as dope as you think, So like I just thought that was a good kind of thing to help with this kind of section here. So yeah, I think if do you have anything else you can think of Tyson, in regards to that? Or
Yeah,
to
I guess
build
I
off
just
of?
want to add on to the Dunning-Kruger effect. Is basically the concept is the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Yes.
Right? Is the deeper you go into anything, the more you learn about it, the more you realize like, oh, I'm not actually as good as I think I am. So
Yes.
there's like kind of like a dark, that's the dark side to education, right? Is that like now I know the things that I'm not good at, and then it kind of deflates my ego a little bit, which, you know, is good to an extent because it keeps you like at your level of like, okay, I know that I'm this good, but I'm not this good yet.
Yes.
And there's something to strive towards. I know the direction I'm going in. But then again, like once I get to this level, I realize like, oh, there's another level above that one too. And so it's like, it's this constant battle. And that's, again, like kind of going back to my last comment, which was the journey never ends. There's always another level to go towards. And
Yes.
there's always that extra, 5% that you can then add on to your current 5%.
Yes.
So anyway, yeah, that was the only thing I wanted to add, is just like being aware of what you don't know is super powerful in terms of giving you direction to learn, but it's also dangerous because it basically causes you to almost feel like an imposter when you're working in music, because you have the humility to understand I'm not actually the best, right?
Yes.
And there's always more to go.
Fire. Man, well, there it is. Fellow songmaker, fellow producer, fellow mixing engineer. Those are like 5 steps to going pro. You got to get inspired first. You got to get inspired. Then that inspiration leads you to develop some killer skills, which could take a little bit, but you can shortcut it through things like we talked about, courses, mentorship, feedback. Then you're going to be specializing, right? There's probably going to be something in this whole thing of songmaking that you really enjoy, that you really love. And you can use that as a gateway to go ahead and start getting paid for this music thing right away. All the while still finding your voice, getting confident in your abilities, all the way to like that, so much so that you're so confident and you've gone through so much of the practice and the iteration that you're just making songs, right? You're just making songs because you committed to this process. You stuck it out. You stayed, you chose to believe, just like the 4 Minute Mile, you chose to believe it's possible for you to make good songs and chose a pro mentality. And you stayed clear of the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? You're trying to watch yourself and how the line between cocky and confident in your own artistry. So we hope that this was super helpful for you. If you are kind of especially in that like development stage, for sure, like I'd just be curious to see, like, let us know where you're at. Where do you fall in this category? If you feel like you're in that development stage, something I got for you that's free that I think will really help kind of speed things up a little bit for you. Then one of the most powerful things you can do when you're in the iteration process of just making songs and you're just in the trenches of doing reps is having a good workflow. So that you know what to do. Think about it like, I think a good analogy is like sports teams or something. I'm sure there's a very specific conditioning like drill that they're going to be doing every practice or every other practice. Why? Because it's the fundamentals, it's the basics. There's a workflow that they're doing to keep themselves in the game, so to speak. I put together a guide to keep you as a songmaker in your game. All right. And you can go to finishsongsguide.com. It's completely free. It's just 10 pages. It's a PDF and it's just 5 steps. Do this, do that, do this, do that, do that. You're done. Finish song from scratch. All right. So if you are looking for a workflow, feeling like it's just a little bit stale right now in how you're creating and how you're showing up creatively, this is going to help you. Super digestible, super easy. And I made it for myself because I was struggling with this. So I know that I wasn't the only one struggling with things like procrastination and writer's block and feeling clogged up. So if any of that resonates with you, if you think it'd be a good fit, you can go to finishsongsguide.com. And if you wouldn't mind going a step further, I would love it if you really would. Let us know where you at, like via a comment, or a review. We would appreciate that too. Just where are you at, and what are some other topics that we could talk about to help you in the current stage that you're at? Because we'd love to dive deeper on kind of some all this stuff is pretty nuanced, right? So if you have a certain situation, a certain thing, something you're unclear about, you just let us know. And we want to do our part to like link arms together as all fellow musicians here, fellow songmakers, and do our part to, keep everyone informed and keep everyone motivated and inspired to keep getting to the next step. All right. So with that being said, have a wonderful, fantastic day. Go create a little bit if you can. We'll see you here in the next episode.